panelists up. We have Walt Englund. I was told not to introduce everybody with their full bios because that would take us about the whole 50 minutes. So I'm going to just bring up Walt Englund, Deputy Associate Administrator for Programs in the Space Technology Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters. Alan Campbell, Senior Program Manager of Space Systems at Draper, and John Reed, Chief Rocket Scientist at ULA. Thank you so much. Yes. So I'm just a lawyer, don't everybody groan. I'm actually at the head of the program of Air and Space Law at the University of Mississippi, where we are focused on actually supporting commercial space and commercial space efforts. And we literally, that's part of our mission statement to do that because we really identified a need. I think we all know that space law is not very robust. You can hold all of space law in your hand. And in fact, you have on your tables a barcode where you can actually buy all of space law so that you can hold it in your hand. But today we're going to talk about turning the cislunar space into a hive of machine and human activity, really a prosperous opportunity for humanity. We talked about sort of the key takeaways we wanted you all to have coming out of this session. Basically, what we want to be clear about is this is not Apollo, right? We're not going to the moon because it is hard anymore. We're going because we're building the future of humanity. We're building a cislunar ecosystem that will benefit the human existence here on Earth and ultimately the human existence in communities beyond Earth in the short term and in the long term. We're going because space is a unifier, and a multilateral lunar mission may be the best way to promote international collaboration, again, both in space and here on Earth. And we're going because investing in space is investing in the future. So we're going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to give our panelists each a little bit of time to share their ideas before we go into a Q&A. I'm going to encourage Q&A. I would love audience participation for this panel, but if everybody's shy, I do have questions also. So we'll go ahead, Walt, please.
Okay. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amit's stunt double today. If you haven't figured out, I am not Amit, but Amit sends his regards. I'm actually from a sister organization at NASA, Space Technology Mission Directorate. Amit works in the Exploration Systems Mission Directorate and runs the Moon to Mars program. I run a program, actually I run 10 programs within STMD that actually develop technologies from low TRL to high TRL space technologies, many of which those are feeding into the Moon to Mars program and economy. I also serve on something called the Federated Board at NASA, and we have over the last 2 years developed a document called the Blueprint Objectives for Moon to Mars. Just out of show of hands, how many people are familiar with NASA's Moon to Mars Blueprint Objectives? About half. Okay, we got to work on that. I will tell you though, it really does lay out not the how we're going to do it, but the what we're going to do in a Moon to Mars program. There are 63 objectives in that document, and you can Google it. It's online. It's available. I highly encourage recommended reading for all of you in this audience. Of the 63 objectives, 11 of them are focused on infrastructure. And in fact, Space Technology Mission Director, my organization, developed those 11 infrastructure objectives. That's not to say we're responsible for closing them all or investing in the technologies that are going to make those reality, but we're sort of the shepherds of the infrastructure portion of the objective set. There's a transportation and habitation set of objectives, a science set of objectives, and an operations set of objectives. And they're kind of spread across the 4 mission directorates at NASA that represent those entities. But STMD is sort of chartered with shepherding the infrastructure objectives through the next decade. Again, would encourage you to read them. Of the 11, the first 3 are power, communications, position, navigation, and timing. And you can think of those as kind of the basic utilities for any sustained lunar presence. In fact, those are the things that we really need for both human and robotic missions in the next, I'll say, coming years. Exploration Systems Mission Director Jim Free's organization, they're really focused right now on Artemis 1 through 5, say, is the initial return to the moon. If you've read the architecture definition document that ESDMD has put out, they have 4 segments. I think somebody referenced that earlier. There's a initial return, there's a foundational exploration, and then the sustained lunar presence. And the infrastructure objectives are really focused on those latter 2 segments. Again, the utilities. Then there's a set where you start to bring in things like ISRU and precision landing if we're going to set up a base camp and go return to the same place multiple times. Construction, additive manufacturing, those are things that really will enable sustained presence. And I think the investments that STMD and companies like yours and others out there need to be making now to enable that to occur in the 2030s. So again, I'd encourage you, if you haven't, find yourself a copy of that document. Take a look at it, and that's sort of the roadmap or the blueprint, just as the title says, for what we intend to do over the next coming decade. So looking forward to the discussion.
Yes.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
So I'm going to do my best to keep my comments here brief to get to more questions, but to Michelle's point earlier, we're not going back to the moon because it is hard, but it is still hard to do, right? It's not easy. Company I work for, Draper, we were founded a long time ago as a graduate lab at MIT, but when we divested from MIT, we did so purposefully as a independent nonprofit so that we were incentivized to go solve the hard problems. And we were fortunate enough to be the prime contractor for the guidance computer for the Apollo missions, and we're still fortunate enough to be on every single element of the Artemis program right now. So we're really focused here, and why I'm sitting here today is because this is indeed a hard problem, and not just from the technology perspective, to Walt's point, but from all of the other perspectives as well. That's why we're really excited to see what Orbit is doing at DARPA and what General Shaw said yesterday from the Space Force perspective, and how all of these different organizations and industries are going to come together to form this ecosystem. So excited to get to your questions and to talk more about the details.
All right, and I get to jazz the crowd a little bit. So my journey in this domain started back when Tori first tweeted Cislunar 1000, 1,000 men and women living and working in space. And so through that, we ended up working with him. It was my job to get a white paper across the finish line on the Strategic Propellant Reserve that kind of was part of the impetus for the Cislunar Ecosystem Task Force. And then I've been involved behind the scenes helping get that process up and running. But I come at this as a merchant supplier of space access. My company, my job exists to help everybody else get to space and do the cool stuff you want to do. And so my perspective is all about how do I grow the ecosystem so that I get to do more work for you guys. And part of what's special about ULA is we partner with our customers, right? That there was a comment the other day about, I always go back to one of the things the general told me, where the only natural predator of a space vehicle is a launch vehicle. And so part of our DNA is how do I make sure I'm going to deliver you not just to the orbit you want to get to, but in a condition to do the mission that you want to do the good things that you want to do, to create the science value that you want to have. And so I come at it from a partnership across the entire ecosystem. So that's part of my impetus for pursuing this, is really how do we as a community move that ecosystem forward. A couple other thoughts I wanted to share just to stimulate questions. One is we are still talking ecosystem, not economy. And I bring that up because NASA can support an ecosystem just by having the infrastructure layers that we're talking about. An economy is only going to exist when we start tapping into a broader consumer base, i.e. by bringing something of value back to Earth. And so we can do in-space delivery of capacity and capabilities. That's going to help broaden the ecosystem, but it won't be a thriving economy until we've tied it back to the whole of humanity. I bring that up because that ties back to Article 6, and we're trying to make sure that we create value for all peoples. And so we want to find ways to bring that benefit back to all peoples, not just to billionaires or not just to specific companies or specific nation space agencies. There was a third thing, but we'll just go ahead and open it up to questions. This is just a lot of fun to talk about this topic.
It is a lot of fun to talk about. I will throw on the lawyer hat for a minute and just say, that is one of the things we have to contend with when we talk about building this ecosystem is Article 1 of the Outer Space Treaty, which says the exploration and use of space shall be for the benefit of all humankind. And when we think about that benefit sharing, a lot of people sort of get all twisted around concerned, but what the Outer Space Treaty doesn't say is when those benefits have to accrue. And I think it's very clear that everybody on Earth benefits from space right now, period. And so that is the way we need to think about creating this ecosystem and building, and then building this economy. So I am just gonna, because it is a very daunting idea. It is hard. We're not going because it's hard, but it is. So what are the first steps? Like, what would you say would be the most important? We know we need government investment. What would be the first thing that you want to see, that first step to get us to the ecosystem we want?
Well, I'll take a crack at it, and then I'll pass it to my friend John down here. We are trying to figure out what it is that will create a lunar economy. I don't know if that's possible, a self-sustaining lunar economy. That's the big question I think a lot of you have wrestled with. NASA wants to enable the return of humans to the moon, but we don't want to be the anchor tenant in perpetuity. We would like to do that, build an economy, have other players come and enable that economy, and then move on to solar system exploration, other places in the solar system, Mars in particular. That's the next step in the blueprint document. The question is, how long will that take? Is it a decade? Is it 2 decades? Is it even possible? But that's what we are trying to set up the plan, and the infrastructure is part of that plan to do just that. I think Orbit was out there. He said it well. I think that, I see way in the back there. Yeah, maybe it surprises you. It shouldn't, but we're working very closely with DARPA. There are some government agencies that actually work together, and their Luna 10 activity and our infrastructure development, I think are, I'll say, almost joined at the hip. So I think we're relying on DARPA as a partner to help us figure out this lunar economy, a way to make that happen.
And since Alan was foolish enough to give me the microphone, I'll go next and say, to me, it is figuring out how we close the timeline gap. Because right now, we're all familiar with the NASA timelines. Nothing against STMD. You guys are faster than most at bringing technologies to market. But you've got an incredibly long development cycle. And so what we're trying to do is leverage the opportunity to lay in that infrastructure layer in a manner that allows other people to create economic value building off those capabilities. The challenge that we all have is I'm taking something that would normally a decade-long effort to lay in an infrastructure capability, but I'm looking for somebody to leverage that capability in their business model where a terrestrial timeline is like 2 years to market is long. And so how do we get that capability stood up that supports a 2-year business cycle in a time frame that enables them to tell us when we've gotten it close enough so they can get to market? First challenge. The second challenge is related in that what I've been seeing lately is how quickly things pivot. One example that I use right now is Kuiper and how quickly my market changed when they signed a contract to come into the market. Another is what we were hearing about earlier today with VAST. And it's like these changes in capabilities where other people are coming into the marketplace are happening very fast. And we need to figure out how do we react, enabling them, but also surviving our business models when those kind of disruptive changes happen. So 2 challenges for the community there.
So I'm going to just try to tie together what John said and what Walt said. First, foot stomp the fact that we don't know what the initial cislunar economy is going to be based on. There's not a killer app, or we haven't found gold, or whatever the particular resource is that's going to initially close that business case. Really, again, really excited to see what DARPA is doing in order to help, at least with that smaller version of that market, as Orbit was saying. But in the meantime, we need to do exploratory missions to try to figure out what that's going to be, what that use case is, while building the technology that's going to enable the infrastructure to make it sustainable once we figure out what it is. So preferably we do these in parallel rather than serially, just because of the time-based horizons that John was talking about. But that really is the goal that we all need to aim to.
Any questions yet? Okay. So one thing that, part of the reason that we have this, that Beyond Earth has this wonderful symposium here is to explain why space is so important to non-space people in the audience. Can you think of a terrestrial sort of parallel so people can really understand what we're talking about when we talk about building an ecosystem in space?
Since I actually have the mic this time. So I'll talk to two very quickly. One is I have the, again, luxury of sitting right outside of my office at Draper, some of the initial software and physical rope memory that we used for the Apollo systems back in the day. And the software is taller than I am when it's laid out in the original punch cards. But inventing software, we invented how to write software. We invented a compiler. We invented microchips, all in the Apollo program that we use and take for granted every day. And another one that I'm talking about orbit a lot, but I'm surprised that he didn't mention in his talk earlier, GPS. How many of us think about the GPS satellite system? Well, in this room, probably a lot of us, but outside this room, think about the GPS satellite system as we're trying to get from our hotel here this morning. So there's two.
I think a lot of us have been kicking around different scenarios like the expansion westward in the U.S., the discovery of America and creation of colonies and all of those efforts. But I actually think of this in a different vein, and that is we are at a confluence of events. We're in the midst of a digital transformation. We have a new Space Force that is really focused on how do we become an entire digital force, and that has become an impetus for change across the industry. And so we're looking at both interest in space, investment money that's interested, government transformation that's going on, and this confluence is really enabling us to take this bold step forward.
Yeah, I'll just add, we NASA, really tried to help tell the story to the American public, what the investment in NASA and the space economy, how it benefits them. And I will tell you, within my organization, Space Tech Mission Directorate, we have the Technology Transfer Program, one of 10 in the org that actually runs tech transfer for the whole agency, not just for STMD, but they have a document called NASA Spinoffs that talks about the spinoff, the terrestrial applications of investments in space economy over the last 2 decades. The one I like to use is the cell phone the camera in your cell phone, because just about everybody's got one of those. The CMOS semiconductor technology that is used, I will bet, in every one of the cell phones that you have right now in your pocket, was invented at JPL for a telescope application, planetary digital imaging, and that there was a company that was created. The gentleman that invented that technology spun off a company that's now ubiquitous in cell phone cameras and other cameras, GoPro cameras. Another one that just comes to the top of my mind, think about it, is there was an investment by NASA to look at space nutrition for astronauts going to deep space. And they looked at it, they discovered a way to produce an omega-3 fatty acid that is a key nutritional component. That particular method is now infused in baby formula. Just about every company that manufactures baby food, baby formula in the United States and around the world. So it's a tremendous benefit. And we need to do a better job, quite frankly, of telling those stories. But they're out there. So we're working on it.
I think that is a key for everybody in the space community, is building that awareness. And one of the things that I deal with all the time is people saying, well, I don't get what's in it for me. Do you have, I know the Spinoff magazine, by the way, is phenomenal, and you can see it online, and it's page after page after page. I mean, the benefits that humanity has reaped from space are legion, but people don't get it. It's like, what do you say when somebody says, and we have already today talked about not being able to afford to send ISS up into a MEO orbit, right? MEO. When we're looking at this money exchange, and we know that we need government investment in order to create this infrastructure for this ecosystem, how do you rationalize it to somebody's constituents?
Well, in that blueprint document, it talked about one of the first things we tried to do was define a set of whys. Why is it we explore? Why do we do what we do? Why is this a good investment? And I think we boiled it down to three. There's a science piece, there's a national posture, and there's an inspiration. And the hope is, and there's a number of subcategories in each one of those, but the hope is we can capture everybody's why, wherever you are, whatever your background is, so that everybody can eventually see themselves in this Moon to Mars endeavor. That's a challenge. We are not there yet, but there is Pam Melroy, who you probably know is the Deputy Administrator at NASA, said we need to figure out how to engage the public and everyone of the public. So, and doing that starts with a why it is we're doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think I want to build off that a little bit, but pivot. From my perspective, the whole reason for having this ecosystem is to make money. And I don't mean that in the negative way. It is a transformation of the way we have been doing space as a community. Thus far, it's all been science-focused. There has been some terrestrial-based economy that we've been supporting. But really, we are about to transition from what matters is the hardware and the system that we build to go do cool science and that we deploy to space, to how do we provide services that create value. And so part of the challenge we have going to the moon is going to be, how do I learn lessons from what ISS has done to inform the CLDs? How do I take what we're learning as we stand up CLDs and figure out how to make money in LEO and move that business model to the moon? And it's going to be about then figuring out what systems do I need, what infrastructure enables it that allows me to extract value from the moon and return it to humanity. And that is a completely different business rhythm than anything that we've ever had to do before. So it's exciting and challenging.
I want to say that Walt said a lot of the things I wanted to particularly say on this topic, but I'll add a couple other tidbits. And one is, I think NASA has always done an amazing job with the PR and inspiration side of all of this. I mean, I see more NASA t-shirts walking around anywhere, any city that I'm in, than any industry organization, that's for sure. But I think the industry needs to do a lot better. And I'll put myself and Draper, we as certainly on that list that needs to do better. And also, you say that particularly billionaire-founded companies, that it's hard for a lot of the public to see the messaging out of some of those organizations as being actually for the benefit to the public, rather than to the benefit of, continuing to fill out their bank accounts. And I think it's to us, all of industry, all of this community, to really work hard to try to get that message across to the general public, not just us within this, this particular niche of an industry.
I think it's interesting because it's really a make money plus, right? Because nobody's going to become a billionaire from lunar resources anytime soon. But we need to be able to make money to be able to sustain some sort of presence so that perhaps we can become the billionaire.
Yeah, and I was going to build on that too. I think that's why I keep harping on we need to find that value back to every person on the street, because that's when they start to recognize the tie to the value that space brings to them. We can talk about it, we can inspire, but it really doesn't hit them where it matters to them in their day-to-day lives until it's the GPS on their phone that's enabling. And even then, they don't realize that that's from the satellites. They go, why do I need satellites? I've got GPS on my phone. So we still have the education piece that we've got to go overcome. But once we tie product back to their lives, then space is relevant to everyone's lives.
Yeah. And what if we don't find something on the moon that we can use economically?
Then I'd turn to Andy Aldrin and say, yeah, you're right.
had some questions. Yep.
And I'm a little hesitant to say this, but I feel more comfortable today because I'm not between a venture capitalist and somebody who used to work for Newt Gingrich. But how do we, there's a lot of discussion about the economy and whatnot. How do we ensure that that economy actually delivers value to everybody, and that it's not just, it's not just the ecosystem that exists, but that it's equitable, that that it's inclusive, that it's not just. I'm reminded of a Facebook post I saw where it was like, see the first hotel in space. All we want is Medicare for all. So my question is how do we ensure we get that so that it's inclusive and everybody can buy into it? It's not just limited to a few players.
So I think one of the threads that really underpins a lot of the things that was said yesterday specifically, and hopefully as we get through the rest of today as well, is tying it back to the sustainability of the Earth, right? I know we do a lot of work with Blue Origin, and the messaging doesn't always come across, but what Jeff Bezos says publicly is his goal is to bring all of the dirty industries on Earth off the planet so that Earth can be held pristine for people to live in. That's a way to provide value to everybody, regardless of their background or upbringing. But again, still from a PR messaging perspective, it doesn't always come across. And we've got to go do the exploration, as I said earlier, in order to make sure that's going to actually work.
And I always tie it back to the policy conversation. The reason I'm here at this event is to talk policy and help inform and shape thinking, because getting those policies right is what allows us to operate in a manner that ensures that we're not doing foolish things or degrading life for people.
Yeah, I think it comes back to engaging the broadest range of stakeholders and figuring out what their why is and speaking to their why. So we obviously we've got work to do. This, like you said, we tend to speak at echo chambers. Everybody thinks alike in this community, but we really do need to broaden the base and engage a much broader cross-section of the public and the stakeholders.
I do want to tug on that a little bit, because I think we do actually have a lot of very different forums that we get together at. So I was just out at Ascend, I was down with Greg Autry, and at each of these conversations, we've explored a different facet of this system and the challenge ahead of us. Going back to your point, one of the conversations we had down at Space Settlement was, how do we allow people to extract resources from a location for setting up a reasonable exclusion zone around their site, and what could be the construct? And what we came to was you could do something similar to what we do with the ITU for a lunar resource. And so it would basically be that you allow them to have a site for a period of time to start to extract value from. If they don't get to market, then they lose the license to continue to operate in that area, and somebody else can come in and take it over. If they do, that while they're still extracting value, they can continue to exercise that zone that they get to utilize. And so it's those kind of conversations that help inform the thought process around the community. And so each of these venues, this one included, allows us to explore a different facet of that conversation.
I would just add, sorry, Steve, the Artemis Accords and the Chinese, Russia, Venezuela, Pakistan International Lunar Research Station, in a way they're competitive, but in a way they're really great, because both sides want to have partners. Because what they're hoping to do is create norms, right? And the more people you have on your side when you land on the moon, the more that your norm, possibility that your norm will stick. And so I think we are addressing sort of that inclusiveness through those programs. I'm more concerned, honestly, about inclusion within the United States and seeing communities left behind within the United States and not understanding. And I think that is incumbent on all of us to take a day of the week and go and talk to children in public schools and talk to public universities and get the word out, because people are inspired by space. But if they're not exposed to it, they don't get that inspiration.
Thanks, Michelle. It's a wonderful conversation so far, fellas. I would like to bring this conversation back, if I could, to the economics of it, and specifically about the government investment of helping to create a cislunar economy. So we have DARPA, AIAA, U.S. Chamber making recommendations that could potentially represent a much greater government involvement and government investment into helping to establish a robust cislunar economy. In your opinion, how far should the government go, both regulatory way and in terms of the amount of investment that should be made? I mean, some folks are saying that it is a matter of national security, that we have this economy, we create this economy, and we are a leader. So what is that? How does that translate into investment of national treasure?
I guess I would second your position that it is a critical aspect of U.S. leadership to enable that economy and infrastructure to develop so that our standards of how people conduct business are maintained in that ecosystem. To that end, I think we are still in a time period where we're reliant on the government for the funds to operate those systems. And so in the short term, I think we need to figure out the way to capitalize and to bring infrastructure layers to the marketplace that are enabling both of the NASA mission for Artemis and going to Mars, and enabling of other people to enter the marketplace. And so to your point, Steve, I think that's where we were so excited to have the partnership with Commerce, because that starts to become the venue for how we bring those other people into the ecosystem as well. But in the short term, I think we're stuck setting up what are the needs, what are the desires, what are the capabilities that are needed in the marketplace, both, and it's a challenge, looking at what NASA needs to go do the missions they envision, but keeping in mind the broader ecosystem that we'd like to support. And so it's how do you have that aspirational capability that is tappable. The other thing that I did want to bring up quickly is we also need to be mindful of the fact that capacity has chunkiness to it, if you will, in that we will lay in a base layer of infrastructure. When somebody else comes along to consume that demand or to grow beyond it, they'll probably invest to bring it up to the level they need, but that may fully consume some of the bandwidth of some of those systems. And so we need to find ways for the government to come alongside and make sure we maintain that marginal benefit for the government use above whatever the economic engine is requiring of that infrastructure layer. So it's a new challenge for us to be thinking about here.
So I'll answer the question. I think that the whole of the US government should invest to the amount that is required to be sure whether that economy will exist or not. Because once we are sure that economy will exist, that's when the commercial, that's when venture capital, that's when other potential consumers will jump in and help augment that funding. But I'm getting to the point now that I'm becoming more exposed to the national security side that there's no difference between civil, commercial, and national security when it comes to Cislunar.
I'll just say, it's like the early days of aviation and the railroad industry. There is a certain threshold that the government needs to invest in the infrastructure to make it sustaining and economically viable. I don't know what that number is for cislunar exploration, but I hope that we make the choice as a community to make the right level of investment to enable that to happen.
Walt, did you just compare NASA to the Postal Service of the aviation era?
The government. I'm sorry, I can't get over the chunkiness term that you use. That's a technical term, and I'm trying to get my head around that from a rocket scientist perspective. But,
you got to speak to every man.
and woman. Yeah, yes. Very good.
So a couple of questions. John, let me start with you. You lived through the ULA pre-Elon Musk and then the post. You talked about agility. Be interested in some of the observations you have from that experience, you and Tori and company, as you adapted to this new market environment. And then an impossible question for the three of you. Take off your organizational affiliations, but you're all, three of you, trained as empiricists. You live in a very factual, data-based world, but let's take that off, and I'd be curious to know what you see. You're guessing, and you'll be wrong, I understand, but you're guessing as to what the potential economic opportunity might be in the Cislunar world. When I worked in the White House Space Council, the late Edward Teller used to come down and lecture us about H3, helium-3 as a potential, right. Other people see extraction industries as possible, and so forth and so on. But I'd be just curious, won't hold you, accountable to it, but just your thoughts. So go ahead, John.
I'll start with the easy question. How did we survive? I would say the thing for everyone to recognize is it does stem from leadership at the top. Tori was the one that came into ULA with the vision for how we bring the fight to SpaceX. And so it's through his leadership and transformation of the company that has allowed us to be competitive. The thing I foot-stomped to other people is when we did the phase 2 competition prior to this current competition that we're in right now, we actually ended up not just being the best value provider, but the best cost provider. And that is a significant transformation to the company that was a monopoly in the earlier era. And so knowing that we can evolve the company, we can bring in young talent, we can drive technical excellence and still reduce cost is a testament to the leadership that we have. I'm debating about whether, I think I'll let you go ahead and answer the second question.
Andy is not in the room.
Okay, I'll try. Last week, actually at an AIAA conference where I saw John, I heard a quote, I don't remember exactly, I think it was something along the lines of, if you took the surface area of the moon, it's about equivalent to the continent of Africa. And if suddenly in the middle of the ocean, a new continent popped up, there would be you can imagine, there would be a mad race to go figure out what the resources were on that continent and mine it and take advantage of. And so I think we're doing just what would happen on Earth, is figuring out we need to build the transportation system and the exploration infrastructure to get to that new continent and figure out what the resources are. And there may be untold resources, gems, and we don't know. But if we don't go look and explore, we will never know. And rest assured, somebody else will.
So I'll say Jack Schmidt sat on our board for several years, so I've heard a lot about helium-3. To answer the question more directly, Courtney, I think, and Walt's kind of getting at this, I think it's something we haven't thought of yet, or at least hasn't been thought of widely yet. I don't know what it is. Rare earths or their equivalents could be something that would certainly make a very strong case for a lot of exploitation very quickly, especially given some of the strategic reasons behind where they're currently found and located on Earth now. But it's going to be a fun exercise to figure out the answer to that question.
And I'm going to go out on a limb because we've already gone out on that limb. So one of the things we've talked about is the lunar resources are really enabling for us to access the near-Earth objects. And when you unlock that key, that's when we suppose that there's a $3 trillion economy that you're tapping into at that point. And so whether that's 2050 or sooner, I leave it to others. I hope to still be alive, but I won't be around. And so, but the answer to your question in my mind is $3 trillion.
Thank you. We won't hold you to it. Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, Dave Huntsman. I was struck by the comment that going forward, there's no real difference between civil, military, or commercial cislunar economy, because I'm wondering how we feel if the Chinese put it that way. in particular. So I'd like to ask all four of you to comment on that, but I especially like Michelle to comment on that also because of her recent international experience and work as well, because there's a lot of nuance involved there.
So I happily take that on head on. So first of all, President Eisenhower made the point of separating civil space from military space. No other country has done that the same way we have. So fundamentally, when we look across the table at China, that is a strong foundation for us to stand on. But there cannot be a difference. Every single satellite, every single spacecraft, every single space object can be used by the military. In your licenses, if you're a remote sensing satellite, it says that the government has the right to purchase your data first. Every single object in space is a dual-use object. And so you cannot separate, but you can try to use law and collaborations and, soft law, those lovely resolutions that the UN always produces, to try and not, and I hesitate to say maintain the peace, but to mitigate the potential for conflict.
And if I can, I'll build on that and say, in my mind, it's not so much that they're the same. If you think about terrestrial infrastructure and what we have within the boundaries of the country, that is used by all different facets of the government. It is enabled by a thriving ecosystem. And so that's kind of the same model that I bring to the Cislunar ecosystem once we get there. It's about a whole of government. So different agencies will have different roles, but it does require every agency to bring their excellence to enabling that ecosystem to develop and thrive.
And the other part, I 100% agree with both Michelle and John's comments there, but the other part that I'll bring in is the performers, the folks doing the work, developing the satellites, developing the landers, developing all of the other infrastructure assets, they're doing similar work for both civil customers, national security customers, as well as their own commercial interests. So from a technology development perspective, from an economy and business model perspective, everything's tied together.
Yeah, I'll just add that we are sensitive to that, and from within NASA, obviously, the Civil Space Agency. I will tell you, when we started this partnership with our friends at DARPA on Luna 10 and Draco, and even with Logic, the interaction there were questions, and we were asked to pause and think carefully about, okay, what is this going to look like globally by NASA engaging with DARPA, who sometimes are seen as a military organization. Are we sending the wrong message? And I think we did. We stepped back and said, no, we're doing this. DARPA is not solely military. They do lots of things that serve the public, just like Orbit had said. But it's not lost on us. We need to be careful and cautious. And I think the Artemis Accords are a way for us to do that and say, these are the values that we're putting out there, and want other countries to come work with us in this way, in a peaceful exploration, civil space endeavor, but recognizing that there'll always be the military component of that as well. Just like you said, they are dual use capabilities.
And let's not forget Article 4, the moon and other celestial bodies shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes, so we can fight as much as we want in space, but not on the moon, so.
Michelle, deterrence is a peaceful purpose.
Yes. Was there a question over here somewhere? Did you see? Oh.
Hey there, my name is Laura Winter, and I'm the editor and host of the podcast, The Downlink. And my question is a bit perhaps expansive, and I want to go back to closing the business case. That one of the panelists said that, well, there's not really volatiles that have been discovered up there that are going to close the business case. But let me put this out to you. When we went and we built the Panama Canal, it's not like there were a whole lot of volatiles down there, but we built it because we understood that there was a business case beyond the canal. And so I kind of wonder about the moon being kind of like the Panama Canal, and the volatiles that we know are out there on asteroids that perhaps the moon really is more like our Panama Canal to close the business case for the volatiles that are in the beyond. And that could be quite a bit of money.
Yeah, I guess I would soften that a little bit in that, in my mind, L1 would probably be the Panama Canal, but the government wants to go to the moon, and so that gives us the path to build something that becomes that bridge to get away from cislunar and go beyond. So it's lunar, cislunar, and, to your point.
Yes. I think I want to just draw one other little nuance there, and that's, we know that there are volatiles on the moon. We don't know exactly how many or how much and where and how easy or possible it is to extract them for the economical gain. But I really think we'll be able to figure it out. But I completely agree with your point that it's the path to the real long-term business case there.
I'm putting on my preservation, conservation hat now, and also want to think about the cultural aspects of the moon. And so I love this idea that it is a pathway to something more. When we talk up to people on the street about mining the moon, the immediate reaction is, well, don't make it look different, or I don't want to see oil derricks up there. But, this is the awareness building that we need to do. But personally, I do think I would like the moon to be as pristine as possible. And I would like to see it as a gateway to all of the other massive resources of the universe.
And I'd say that goes back to the importance of the conversations we're having here and in other forums, because I fully expect, and this is just John Reed talking, that there is going to be some private party that is the first person to determine ground truth on the moon. It's not going to be our collective effort. It's going to be somebody beating us there and figuring it out first. And if they do that, then there's going to be a gold rush. And so we need to get ahead of that through the conversations around policy, around regulation, around authorization and supervision to make sure that we're ready when somebody makes that discovery.
Absolutely. Are there any more questions out there? So I have a question. Sure. We do have to think about China and other countries. Do you see a path towards international collaboration outside of Artemis with things like landing pads or roads or other infrastructures like that?
Well, from a NASA perspective, you probably all know we're really prohibited from working with China by law. There was a little crack in that, I think, with the Chang 8 mission, where we were allowed to use some of our orbiting assets to, I'd just say, image and interact with China. But other than that, and I think that the law goes back to the 2011 time frame. Yeah, we really can't engage. I hope that there might be an opportunity through this exploration initiative to open that door. Because you just look at what we've done with Russia through the International Space Station. I think there are opportunities for soft power and being able to bring those countries that we otherwise don't have great relationships with. So I'm hopeful there's an opportunity there.
So we need a lunar amendment to the Wolf Amendment.
Perhaps, so, yes.
So in a similar vein, 0% is an extremely small number. So I certainly don't think it's zero, although it's pretty close to that, especially in the near term. But geopolitics can change very quickly, and a lot of things that are unpredictable can push that. So here's hoping to improves.
I guess I'll play devil's advocate then and go, I think we're playing very, very different games. And so I think there's a challenge to, from a great power standpoint, doing collaboration when we have fundamentally different objectives in the domain. That said, the physics of the domain are going to require industry to interact. I am going to be launching through constellations. I'm going to need to share information with them, and they share information with me so that we don't have tragic consequences for both of us. And so I think there are avenues, both when we're talking the ITU version of Lunar, and when we were talking space traffic integration, to have the data sharing and open channels from a safety of operations standpoint that enable better relationships, but that does not take away from the competition that we will continue to have going forward.
Fantastic. Any more questions? Right on time? Yeah. It's the lawyer in me. Yeah.